Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Seelheiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. I'm Alicia Seelheiser, an astrologer, herbalist, and witch living in Oregon on Kalapuya land, and I offer astrology consultations and teachings aimed at helping you honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition.
I'm Lori Kaufman, an astrologer, tarot reader, writer, and teacher. I co-lead the Asteroid Special Interest Research Group for NCGR, an astrology organization, and I offer all different sorts of readings, online and in person.
Right. Hey, everyone. We're back to talk more about houses in astrology, which is such a great way to work with astrology technique to get really grounded understanding of how astrological movements are impacting you personally in your life in really tangible ways. And this is a follow-up of our episode that we did recently on what the house topics mean in astrology, and that's linked down below. So if you're not familiar with working with houses in astrology, we really recommend that you start there. But today we'll be talking about how to work with the planets that rule the houses in astrology, because that is one of the core techniques of Hellenistic astrology, which is one of the main modalities of astrology that Lori and I both practice, that comes from ancient Greece and is a merging of Egyptian and Mesopotamian astrological techniques, as well as Greek theories around mathematics and symmetry and philosophy and all that good stuff. And so when we're looking at house rulers in astrology, we are looking at the 7 traditional planets because this technique was developed before Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were discovered. And the 7 traditional planets are the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, all of the planets that you can see with the naked eye. And we are using the traditional rulership scheme. And so I'll just go through that quickly, saying that Mars rules Aries, Venus rules Taurus, Mercury rules Gemini, the Moon rules Cancer, the Sun rules Leo, Mercury rules Virgo, Venus rules Libra, Mars rules Scorpio, which is different than modern astrology, which would say that Pluto rules Scorpio. Then we have Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, Saturn ruling Capricorn, Saturn also ruling Aquarius, which is also different than modern astrology, which would say that Uranus rules Aquarius, and Jupiter rules Pisces, which is also different because modern astrology would say that Neptune rules Pisces. And so if you're working with this technique, we highly recommend you use the ancient house rulership scheme with the planets, because that is the scheme that was used to develop this technique, and it is crazy accurate and really effective. And once you get comfortable with the technique, if you want to play around with Neptune ruling Pisces or Uranus ruling Aquarius, go ahead and experiment. But I'm a big proponent of getting to know techniques within the original framework that they were designed. And this technique, in my personal experience, and I think most astrologers who work with it will say that it's very, very effective when you use the original house rulership scheme. And so when you're doing that, that means that if you're talking about your rising sign, for example, which, people talk a lot about their sun, moon, and rising in astrology, you will want to look at the zodiac sign that's ruling your rising sign. So for me, for example, I'm a Libra rising. That means I'm an air sign. I'm very chatty and friendly. I'm very social. But what's really important about the fact that I'm a Libra rising is the fact that Venus rules Libra. And so whatever Venus is doing in my birth chart says a whole lot about who I am as a person, what my personality is, how my body is, and all of the topics that have to do with the first house. And so this gives you so much nuance to understand how each house in your birth chart is really functioning based off of where your planets are placed in your birth chart. And it also gives you a lot of understanding of how to work with transits because, for example, Venus is currently retrograding in Aries, and that's going to be very impactful for me, my sense of self, identity, body, health, because I am a Venus ruled person. Whereas Lori, as a Cancer
Mhm.
rising being ruled by the moon, is going to be more impacted by the upcoming eclipse than she would by the Venus retrograde because she is a lunar person. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen just to show you all the different house topics to kind of help you get into this because you can use this in so many ways. You can use, the ruler of your first house represents you, the ruler of your fifth house represents your children, the ruler of your 10th house can represent your boss. And so it can really help you get into understanding what the planets are doing in your chart and what life topics are being influenced by each of the planets in your chart.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That was a great introduction. And I think that's definitely one of those situations like, you know, being a person that's on the internet a lot, if you are ever on TikTok, if you see people talk about general astrology, whenever like let's say Venus is in retrograde, I always hear people say like, "Oh, your exes will come back, or you're gonna have X, Y, and Z happen with your money, or just Venus things." And that's not to say that that's not necessarily true, but you want to look at the houses, the two houses in your chart that are ruled by Venus. Which for me, Venus rules my fourth house and my 11th house. So, an old friend might come back with the 11th house, or I might get re-involved with an old group or an old community or people I've met in the past, or an old dream that I used to have might reoccur, right? I might get re-excited about something I used to do. Or with fourth house, there might be an old family member that reappears, or a visitation of some sort, or, things like that. So it tends to appear a little bit more so with the houses that it rules when there are retrogrades specifically. But any transit, you can feel those things. I like to actually just look at those planets as the thing that it rules. So like Venus is my family and friends.
Mhm.
My career is Mars because I have an Aries 10th house, right? My partner is Saturn because I have a Saturn ruled Capricorn 7th house. Um, and sometimes looking at it that way, you can start to see when things shift and move in your life and um, thematically. So that's it's a really great technique.
Yeah, and understanding when things are moving and shifting can be really helpful because
Mhm.
sticking with the example of having a Saturn ruled seventh house, if you're a Leo or Cancer rising, because Saturn is such a slow moving planet, it might take you a bit longer to get things moving in your romantic
Mhm.
relationships, and you might actually not be able to realize the full potential of your romantic relationships until after your Saturn return, your first Saturn return, when you're in your
Yeah.
late 20s or early 30s, as opposed to like me with an Aries ruled seventh house, I end up having things move very, very quickly for relationships because Mars, and particularly Aries, is a very fast moving planet. And so you can look at timing activations for that of, oh, I have a Saturn ruled seventh house, and so that potential will be fully realized after my Saturn return, or for me with my Mars ruled seventh house, Mars retrogrades are very
Yeah.
spicy for my relationships. So it can really help you understand timing. It can help you, if you know there's an upcoming transit with a particular planet, but that planet, maybe it's ruling your ninth house and you don't have a lot of planets in your ninth house. Like maybe that transit, even if it's a really
Yeah.
scary sounding transit, it might not be as activating for you as someone who that planet rules their first house, for example. So it can also help
Yeah.
you kind of sort through, really paying attention to the ruler of your first house in particular, because your first house is you. Like your birth chart represents your whole life, right? You've got your career, you've got your partnerships, you've got your health, you've got your money. But when you're like, well, where am I in my birth chart? That's your first house. That's why we're always talking about the rising sign so much. And
Mm-hmm.
so then using this theory of house rulership, whatever planet rules your first house is arguably the most important planet in your birth chart for you because that planet literally is you. And this is something I first heard Kelly Surtees, who's one of my teachers. I first heard her introduce this concept in an astrology podcast episode like 5 years ago. And it's still something I have to wrap my head around. Like, I am Venus. Or like my mom has an Aries fifth house. So to my mom, I am Mars in her chart. Or, Lori's bosses, when she had bosses, were Mars with her Aries 10th house. Like the literal that the planet who rules the house is that thing in your life is it's a thing to like go meditate on and like chew on because it
Yeah.
actually kind of blows your whole conception of reality open. But it becomes
That's
really
true.
accurate, if we're sticking with a Saturn ruled seventh house thing, like you're gonna need a Saturnian figure as your
Yeah.
partner. And Saturn related transits are what might bring that Saturn figure into
Yeah.
your life.
And I mean, very literally, Saturn can represent delays or things that take longer to develop. Um, or in general, they can just mean that you're going to be older. So I see that a lot where people who are Cancer or Leo risings meet their partner when they're a little bit older, or like particularly in your 30s or beyond. And that is more like the final partner kind of thing. So like you might have longer relationships, but they might not work out until you find that final person after a Saturn return or during a Saturn cycle or something very Saturnian about it might come up. Because before your Saturn return specifically, like you're just not exactly going to know what you want or you're not going to be ready. Whereas somebody with, you know, maybe maybe a Venus seventh house might find somebody who, a little bit younger or earlier in life, or Mars might be faster, or the moon might change a lot, right? You might have a lot of short relationships until you figure out what you want. So that planet is going to say a lot about your relationships, but then looking at how that planet is doing, the dignity of that planet in your chart is also going to be like a really, really big piece of that. So like I do have a Saturn ruled seventh house, but I have Saturn in domicile. So it was very fast and easy once it happened, but my 20s were not super fun for those topics. So like it's kind of just saying like, hey, things are going to get better with age, in whatever two houses that Saturn rules, unless your Saturn's in detriment, and then it could, it could be the opposite. It could also take a little bit longer. There's a lot of nuance in the chart that could change
Yeah.
everything, but yeah, it can kind of just show you what is going to be easier, what is going to be harder.
Yeah. And really, like looking at the dignity of a planet, if you're wanting to know what your birth chart says about the potential for relationships, and so you're assessing the dignity of your seventh house ruler, we have done multiple episodes on essential dignity.
Mhm.
So if you're wondering what detriment, domicile, exaltation, fall, we've also done some
Yeah.
of the minor dignities of looking at if you have a planet in its own bounds or a planet who has triplicity. But when planets have more dignity, that can signify things going more like naturally or how we like expect that they should go. But when
Right.
planets have less dignity, that can signify either inconsistencies. Like I have a friend whose IC, which represents your home and housing, is ruled by Saturn and Aries, and this person lives half the time in Africa and half the time in the United States and has lived all over the
Hmm.
place and is just very inconsistent in their housing. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, although it can be stressful, but it just speaks to the fact that that would be different than if their Saturn ruled IC was ruled by a Saturn in Aquarius. There might be a bit more
Hmm.
consistency with their housing. So it
Right.
can speak to inconsistencies. It can speak to more traditionally difficult experiences. And it can also speak to just more countercultural experiences. Like if you have a
Yeah.
Saturn ruled seventh house and your Saturn doesn't have a lot of dignity, then you might need a partner who, like maybe you're queer, for example, or maybe you're
Hmm.
non-monogamous, or maybe you just need a partner who like is not a normal person, which is amazing. Like I, as
Yeah.
a Libra rising, am ruled by Venus in Scorpio, right? So myself, like as a person, I am just a more unconventional person. I have like neurodivergent behaviors. I have all these different things that have made my life more difficult, but I also think it's really beautiful to not just be like a cookie cutter
Hmm.
person who's like everyone else. And so there's a lot of nuance to dig into,
Yeah.
but it can also mean that the natal promise of your birth chart, like when the ruler of a house is in difficult dignity, sometimes those things might just be a lot harder for you to access. And that might mean that you either reimagine what exactly you want in relationship with like the nature of your planet.
Yeah.
And that's a great conversation to have with an astrologer to really dig into like, what is my Saturn and Aries in the second house really saying about the potential for relationships? If Saturn rules the seventh house, that's a great thing to talk with an astrologer about because there's a million possibilities that could come out of that. But sometimes when planets are in more difficult condition, that also might mean that you just want to focus on other things in your life that might have more strength or support from your birth chart. And so
Yeah.
assessing like, is this something that you really want, or is this something that you want because your culture tells you that you should have it, can also be another thing to really
For
unpack.
sure. Yeah, yeah. And when you have just in general two houses that are ruled by the same planet, there is going to be like a tie between those two houses that connect to wherever that planet is in your chart as well. And so that's something that I end up talking to people a lot about too, is how certain houses connect to each other. So the like having a Saturn ruled seventh house, my other Saturn ruled house is the eighth house, which is where my Saturn is. So eighth house topics come up a lot in relationship, right? Um, and then like my fifth house and 10th house are connected. So my hobbies, my creative spaces, and my 10th house, my career, are very intertwined. And so the ruler of those houses are in Cancer. It's Mars, and it's on my ascendant. And so I think this is actually like maybe the best example I have in my chart. Um, because my fifth house topics and my 10th house topics just like have had a very difficult time because their ruler, Mars, is in its fall. It's not doing well, it's retrograde. Um, but because it's in my first house, it means so much to me that I love my career and my hobbies are my career and I do what I love. And those three houses just have to have such a tie together. But for a long time, that was doing circus work or performing or doing like really weird fitness classes or like things like that, where like, it is Mars, so it's movement, but it's in its fall, so it's circus. It's weird. It's something that's unconventional or different, or, um, you know, I do have people judge me for it when I explain what I do. I have had moments like that. Um, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, it's manifested in so many different ways where when I wasn't doing things that felt aligned or didn't feel good, it's felt really bad. I've had really abusive bosses when I've had jobs that like I tried to just fit myself into, you know, a 9 to 5 to have benefits or whatever it was. Like those always ended up being the worst decisions for me.
Hmm.
And so I know we talked a little bit about some of my past with that stuff, especially because my moon is in my 10th. So I know we talked about it in the mutual reception episode too. But it is really cool to start watching techniques like this tie together.
Hmm.
Um, when you can start seeing like, oh, my fifth and 10th house are connected. My fourth and 11th house are connected. My whatever it is, third and 12th, you can do that with each of the houses and then start to play around with how those themes show up in both of those houses, and then what is that planet doing in your chart, right? Do you think about
Hmm.
these themes a lot because it's difficult for you because that planet is not not happy, doesn't have good dignity? Or are you thinking about it very little because maybe it does have good dignity and it's just not a topic that you need to focus a lot of attention or energy on, you know? So that can
Hmm.
be a big part of it too, especially if it's an empty house with a happy ruler. It might just not be something you talk about or think about a whole lot.
Yeah. Okay, I have two things to say to that. One, I just want to
Yeah.
really drive home one thing you just said
Yeah.
of like, for Lori's chart, she has Mars in Cancer. And if you have Mars in Cancer and you're like, oh no, I have a fall in Mars, what does that mean? Looking to the houses ruled by Mars can signify where those difficulties come in. That's not to say that Lori's Mars in Cancer is in her first house, and so it does impact her very personally because it's in her
Yes.
first house, but it's not that Lori is this difficult Mars energy, it's that her bosses, with Mars ruling her 10th, like
Hmm.
she's had some shitty bosses. Mars ruling her fifth. I think most of us have had shitty exes as well, but so
Sure.
so like those are where the difficult Mars stuff can come through. And then Lori found an amazing workaround as, Cancer rising with her Aries moon ruling her, she just became her own boss. Right. And
Right.
so things like that, that's just a really good example of like in Lori's chart, Mars are her dating partners and her bosses, just very literally to drive that point home.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I forgot the other point I was going to make. You had just segued into something else at the end of what you were saying. Oh, empty houses.
Empty.
Empty
Yeah. I
houses.
was gonna say we
People,
should talk about that too.
yes, yeah, empty
That could be its own
houses.
episode.
Yeah, and maybe it will be. It really could
Yeah.
be a great episode, but empty houses can still really matter. Like, for
Hmm.
example, I guess, never mind. I'm not going to use my ninth house because my lot of fortune is actually in the ninth house, which is its own
Mm.
thing.
Yeah, that's
But
powerful.
when you have a house that doesn't have any planets or important points in it, then it really, really comes back to the ruler of that planet. And all of our houses matter in our chart because it represents our whole life. Just houses that have more planets in them tend to have more focus. So if you are someone who has a lot of ninth house placements, then maybe you continued to work at your university after you graduated, or maybe you work in religion, or you
Mm.
love to travel, or you
Yeah.
work with international people, or you're a diplomat, or, ninth house things might be really loud in your life. But if you have an empty ninth house, looking at where the planet who rules your ninth house is
Mhm.
located and the dignity of that planet and what they're doing in your chart will give you a lot more clarity about what that empty house is doing.
Yeah, and of course there's still transits and other timing techniques
Hmm.
that bring light at certain times in your life to those empty houses, but yeah, this is definitely the biggest one is like to get the energy of any house. Um it can even be more important to look at the ruler of it rather than what planets are in the house itself because that can
Hmm.
be um it can show up louder.
Yeah, because that planet, the ruler of the planet, the ruler of the house is like the landlord or the steward or the custodian. They are
Right.
responsible for those house topics. And so, for example, I have a Scorpio second house, and my sun, Venus, and Pluto are all in my second house. So I have a very loud second house, and reimagining the second house is actually such a juicy thing to do because it does have to do with our money, but it also has to do with like everything that we need to have to feel resourced in our incarnate existence. Like the second house is supporting the first house. It's like you're born and then you're swaddled in a blanket, and that blanket swaddling you is the second house. And as someone with a lot of second house placements, really thinking about Like, yes, I live in capitalism. I need money to buy food and pay rent and to survive, but I also need to have a sense of self-worth. I need to have skills. I need to have relationships. I need to have all these other things to support myself. And thinking about that beyond money can just be a really
Yeah.
juicy exercise. But my second house is very loud because I have so many planets in it. But that all comes back to my Mars in Sagittarius in the third house because that is the planet that rules the second house. And so while the
Yeah.
Sun and Venus in my chart influence my Scorpio house and influence what's going on there, they are still reporting to my Mars in Sag, which is very frustrating for my Venus in Scorpio because my Mars in Sag
Yeah.
is off like playing and having fun, and my Venus in Scorpio is trying to be very serious. And that can also get into when you have planets ruling a house and they
Yeah.
can't see the house, that's called
Yeah.
aversion. And so that happens when two houses are next to each other. It would be like my boyfriend's in the other room working right now and we're right next to each other if there was no wall, but like we're not communicating in any sort of way. That's kind of like two houses
Mhm.
next to each other. And then you also have planets that are, I, I guess, houses that are how many, like if you go across from each other, they can see each other. That's an opposition. But the two houses next to those, like the second house can't see the ninth or the seventh house, or the
Yeah.
first house can't see the eighth or the sixth house. And those angles are 150-degree angles. In modern
Yeah.
astrology, they're called quincunxes. And that's literally the angle of a blind spot when you're driving in a vehicle and a car's back here and you can't see them. And so if a
Yeah.
ruler of a house is in aversion to that house, that is like you calling your landlord repeatedly because your fridge isn't working and they're like in Tahiti on vacation and they are not getting back to you and they're not helping you. And so
Yeah.
that can actually be something that can signify more like difficulty. Like my Sagittarius Mars just wants to frolic and ski and play and laugh and have so much fun and just do all these Sagittarius things. And then my Scorpio placements are really trying to like be very serious and stable and consistent. And,
Yeah.
there's just an incongruence between houses when they are in aversion to each other. Hey everyone, it's Alicia, and I offer 60 and 90-minute virtual astrology consultations where we explore your birth chart using Hellenistic techniques, myth, and herbal wisdom to help you understand the cycles weaving through your life so you can honor your most authentic self and trust your intuition. I'm offering 20% off my readings for listeners of the podcast when you use the code CONVO20 at checkout. The link to my booking page is in the show notes below.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. And that's why those four houses, when you look at their relationship to the first house, are the dark houses. So
Yeah, the
2, 8,
second
6, and
six.
12. Yeah.
Sorry, you were about
Um,
to say it.
no, it's fine. Um, but yeah, that's why those houses are dark houses. It's because they don't make aspect. And so you can do that with any house, right? The second house would have a blind spot to the first house, the third house, the seventh house, and the ninth house. And so you can do that with each one. And if the ruler of any of those houses are in aversion, um, then it can make it a little bit more difficult to see it or to use it. Whereas, my going back to my 10th and 5th house example, like those themes felt a little bit more difficult, but one of them squares Mars and one of them trines Mars. And so they do both have really happy relationships with that ability to actually use Mars to its advantage. And I think in those cases, more often than not, it just kind of manifests as something that's societally weird
hmm
or like and I think that's actually a really good outlet or manifestation for it. I was actually just talking to a client who had she was a Aries rising with Libra Mars in her seventh, and we just had a really long conversation about how when and I actually see that placement a lot, but you know, just when you have Mars or your ruler or the ruler of anything. But specifically Mars, like if Mars is unhappy, maybe you just need to give it like a weird way to work out that like isn't societally normal, or maybe you have to like find ways so that it doesn't get bored with the routine, or there's just so many other ways to think about it that isn't necessarily societally talked about, but like how can you give that planet more of an outlet so that
Hmm.
those houses that it rules can feel happier, or like
Hmm.
feel like it's using it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Another thing with
Mitigation.
yes, that is, or
Yeah.
remediation, either word.
Yeah, either way.
Um, but another thing that can be really fun to do with this technique is going back to the seventh house because we all want to know about what our birth charts say about love. If you want to know where am I going to find my partner, looking to where the ruler of your seventh house is placed in your birth chart and looking at those life topics can indicate where you'll find your partner. So, for example,
Hmm.
with my Aries seventh house, if I have Mars in my third house, then my neighbor could be a potential partner. Obviously, not siblings, or someone I went to school with.
Please no. Yeah.
Not that. Who actually my partner is someone who we grew up and went to school together. Or,
Yeah.
one of my exes was someone that I met while I was on the road, and road trips is a third house topic as well. And so, if you're like, where am I going to find my friends? Looking at where the ruler of your 11th house is placed in your birth chart and what sorts of topics are ruled by that, and then seeking out those
Yeah.
spaces can be spaces where you will be more likely to find friends with the help of your birth chart. So that's another really fun way to work with this technique.
Yeah. Yeah. And like sometimes, more often than not, it ends up manifesting very literally. So
Hmm.
like the ruler of my 11th is in the ninth. And I've made a ton of my friends through traveling, or um well, I mean really through traveling, because I travel for my hobbies. So I've traveled to a lot of astrology events or acro events or festivals or retreats, like things that are learning opportunities. Um, so I've met a lot of friends through those, like Alicia. And so a lot of my friends live all over the world, very ninth house, right? But I've also had a lot of my friends have moved away and some have moved back. But just over time, I've had a big pattern of friends moving away, and a lot of my friends are far, and I have to travel to go see them. So sometimes it can manifest that way as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Great. I feel like we've really covered this pretty well. I mean, just really
Yeah.
look at the ruler of your house to get the most nuance and the most like tangible application of what's going on in your birth chart, especially when you're talking about your rising sign. Like, I wish it was more common to be like, what's your sun, moon, rising, and ruler of your rising sign? Like,
I
because
know.
especially like Lori as a Cancer rising, like the moon, like what's the moon phase? What, um, you know, like what house is the moon in? What sign is the moon
Yeah.
in? Like there's a million different Cancer risings out there. Like if I'm a
Yeah.
Libra rising, is my Venus direct or is she retrograde? What sign is she in? What planets is she talking to? Like there's just so much, like there's so many rabbit holes you
Yeah.
can go down. And houses, they're so tangible and they're so literal. Like when you work with your this technique in this way, you'll be amazed at how literal things will come through. Like if
Yeah.
we're talking about the upcoming Mercury retrograde and I have a trip coming up and I'm like, oh, how is that going to impact my Gemini ninth house and my travel? Right. And I'm sure I'll come back in the next episode we record. I'll have some funny story about that because it's like so often when
Yeah.
you're having something going on in your life and you're like, oh, I'm having this travel issue. And you're like, okay, well, what's going on with the ruler of my
Hmm.
ninth house right now? Like you'll find so many really crazy congruencies in your life by working with this technique. Yeah, do you have
Yeah.
any final thoughts about this, Lori?
I mean, so many. so many thoughts, but and so many examples too. I feel like there's just so much to say about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I actually have adopted when I ask somebody, "Oh, what's your sun, moon, rising?" and they say their rising sign is anything other than Cancer or Leo, I will often ask, like if they say, "Oh, I'm a Libra rising," I'll say, "Oh, what's your Venus?" Or, I'll
Hmm.
ask them more about their ruling planet um, as kind of like the follow-up question. So, yeah, I've kind of been adopting that lately because
So
I'm just like,
juicy.
oh, I want to know more about who you are.
So juicy. And then
Yeah.
also just a reminder that Lori and I both offer astrology readings. So if you do want to dig into this nuance more and really get to know the ruler of your first house or what your birth chart has to say about relationships, looking at the ruler of your seventh house and the ruler of your fifth house as well. We actually have not talked about the fifth house that much with relationships, but when you're
Yeah.
dating, the fifth house has a lot to say about that as well. But we do offer astrology readings, so all of our info is down below, and we would love to dig into this technique more. And if you have any examples from your own life of how this has shown up for you or any ahas that came through while you're watching this episode, like please comment them, please share them with us. We'd love hearing from you guys. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any personal stories to share or thoughts and reflections about what we discussed in this episode, please comment down below or reach out to us on Instagram. And please come follow us on Instagram at ConversationsWPlanets, where we share forecasts and updates about the astrological movements happening in the sky, as well as updates about our episodes. The link to our Instagram is in the show notes down below.